Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview.
The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Wednesday, February 5th, and even CNN is admitting that Trump is, in a word, winning. That was one of their own Democrat commentators yesterday after Pam Bondi was confirmed pretty handily by the U.S. Senate, and Vice President J.D. Vance didn't have to come and do a tiebreaker vote, any of that. And meanwhile, Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. have advanced out of their committees, which were really the question mark, especially when some of these closed-door Senate votes were happening secretively, which is unprecedented back to the 1700s. So thankfully, Republicans are on board. But this was Senator Thom Tillis explaining his yes vote on RFK Jr. This is cut 4.
Kennedy. I heard people express their concerns about his pro-choice position. And yet I haven't seen any pro-life organization score this vote or recommend that we should vote against it. I heard him call the NRA a terrorist organization, and yet the NRA is silent on his confirmation. And so I've heard him say that GMOs are a concern. Hopefully we can convince him that not all GMOs are. It's feeding the world. Corn, drought-resistant strains of healthy vegetables will move on. Protein producers were mad about lawsuits were brought against them, but there's been no organized opposition against them. And so maybe it is time to have a different kind of disruptor there.
So let's bring on our good friend Steve Deace. And Steve, good morning. And I thought that was a really interesting explanation. Some people on social media to this particular clip have said that this is kind of an indictment of Pro-Life Inc., that they didn't push stronger opposing RFK. That conservatives just kind of rolled over and said, hey, whatever Trump wants, Trump gets. I'm more in the camp of we do need disruptors. And what Kennedy is doing in HHS, I think, it doesn't have anything to do with his position on the Second Amendment, quite frankly. There are concerns around pro-life policy, but overall, I think that conservative organizations want to support the mandate of Trump and are convinced at this point that his policy and through his deputies are going to be pro-life. So what's your reaction overall to Senator Tillis's explanation there?
Well, I thought it was a very good explanation from a guy that has been basically a soulless technocrat, and that's when he's not just flat out stabbing us in the back as a U.S. Senator. I mean, that was essentially him saying, well, typically all the special interests that I'm a proxy for and a puppet for didn't pull my strings on this, okay? So then I go with my other vested interest, which is I really don't want to face the wrath of Trump in a primary because my base back home hates my guts as it is. So you got my vote. That's essentially what it was. And in a fallen world, and by the way, I know it sounds like it, but none of what I said is a complaint, just an observation. In a fallen world, we have forgotten this. And we have a group of our people who have turned politics into such an idealistic pursuit that if we cannot obtain absolutely 100% of everything that the Council of Nicaea, if they could see into the future and what a constitutional republic would have looked like, that the bishops there would have affirmed by unanimous vote. We cannot, then we betrayed our principles and we can't do it. Or the other thing is we just have no principles. We're just mascots and groupies for the Republican Party. And it's like we have no word of God, ultimate allegiance or playbook that's supposed to bind and guide our conscience except for political expediency. And so, that's the reality of where we are. But how politics used to work in this country when it worked well was people did things, the right thing, for one of two reasons. Very seldom did they do it because they feared God. And, we know the names of those people, and, they fundamental in our history books that we wrote before about 1993 when they all got polluted by political correctness and cultural Marxism. The other reason, which was the majority of the time, is the politicians feared the people, and the people feared God. So this is kind of an example of that. I don't think most of these Republicans want to vote for RFK Jr., Jenna. I think if we put the Wonder Woman lasso of truth around them, would you have urged Donald Trump to appoint RFK Jr. to the highest healthcare post in America? Maybe 10 at the most would say yes, out of the 53 up there. Then maybe another 10 or 15 would say, not who, I like him. I would have thought it was too risky of a pick, but I'll vote for him because I think we need that kind of a presence. And then the rest would be a bleak no, okay? And so you're getting these Republicans to eat crap sandwiches because for the first time, and in public, because for the first time, really, we have more leverage over them right now via Trump than their donor bases and K Street and all the other corporatist global interests that paid for them to lie to us in primaries and drown us out with way higher name ID than our candidates could possibly muster to compete with them would typically allow them to do. And so who knows how long this moment will last. We should take maximum advantage of it. All Pro-Life Inc. can do, frankly, every year is put on a march. They have been, to be ineffective would be a compliment. Since the fall of Roe v. Wade, they've won nothing. They've done nothing. In your home state of Florida there, Ron DeSantis and his people and his organization and base and supporters and natives like you essentially dragged Pro-Life Inc. across the finish line in that Amendment 4 vote. They've lost Ohio. They lost Michigan. They lost several more states in this last election despite Trump winning at the top. So the reality is Donald Trump and RFK Jr. are frankly more popular with the listeners of AFR than Pro-Life Inc. is, than most Republican senators like Tom Tillis are. Why? Because it's not necessarily that some of our people do think these people are biblical, anointed level figures, but it's most of our people is they're the people actually willing to fight. Okay. And would I prefer that the Levite priest who's well indoctrinated into the Torah is the one who would go and lead the fight against the Philistines, but that's not the era we live in right now. So Samson, I guess it is.
And really well said, and I think that encapsulates the moment really well. And so when we have a leader, I think the comparison to Samson is apt. Where does the cultural moment go from here? Because as you said, this is a fleeting moment. We need to take advantage of maximum opportunity. I think the Trump administration is doing that, but we need to have enduring wins. And the people are speaking. I have more hope in the people, but the people who are wanting some of these wins maybe aren't necessarily seeing the same value of government as a biblical worldview framework as they are just a pure pro-America framework.
Agreed. But this is, to go back, if we're going to keep using the land at the time of the judges as a cultural analogy application here, and I think it is somewhat apropos at least. Well, if you read that book, you'll notice that there are moments of temporary wins, sometimes for as much as 40 years, the land had peace, the book says. But in between is much tumult. And a lot of times it comes down to, is there a judge with a calling? Is there a Deborah? Is there a Gideon? Is there a Samson? And then in between that, the people are so far gone, it's just all idolatry and therefore captivity to the system. And I think that's the era we're in right now. I don't know that long-term wins are possible. I'm going to be fascinated to see what Trump can do here in the next, basically after he gives his, the first year the president's in office is never called the State of the Union address. It's the joint address to Congress. I think it's March 4th. He'll be pretty exhausted on what he can initiate executively by about that point in time. And that's to his credit because they're not doing the first 100 days thing a president typically does where it's kind of an issue a week and a theme a week. They're not giving our enemies a week to sit there and deconstruct and lie and dissemble on an issue. I mean, this is a D-Day level event politically what you're saying from the Trump administration. It's a large amphibious assault on multiple beaches here against the total state, and they're reeling, all right, and they're struggling to gather their foothold. But eventually we'll come to the end of what Trump can initiate executively, and then we'll get to things that'll have to be initiated legislatively, like the budget. Mm-hmm. And that's when this wretched hive of scum and villainy, known as Capitol Hill, will come into play. And it'll be that is where we've already seen that Trump 2.0 has adapted to the bureaucratic state, because he did a lot of great things administratively in the first term too. In fact, I would argue pretty much everything that Trump did that was good in that first term is what he could initiate executively, which is why he had a lot of foreign policy successes, for example, because the president has a wide amount of latitude and purview there. All right. And what required the acts of Congress other than a tax cut, he got nothing done. All right. And so it's very clear, though, that he also underestimated the administrative state in his first term. And he's adapted to that and is the closest we've seen to he will not, even if he did everything perfectly, he could not dismantle it in 4 years. But he is making it hurt. We're watching it bleed in real time, and it's marvelous. Now it'll be fascinating to see if he had what lessons he's learned the first time around for how to put heel to throat or boot to throat where Congress is concerned. And that'll be the next test of the level of preparation here, because the kindest thing you can say about most Republican congressmen is that they're feckless. And the reality is most of them are quislings, and they don't want to do. And you're seeing this in your home state of Florida right now. If there was eventually your worldview finds you out, and worldview is destiny. If there was ever a place where where Republicans are like, we hate doing this crap, but we're going to keep doing it because permanently or indefinitely because it's successful and we're getting reelected and we're routing Democrats, it'd be Florida. Except you're seeing now DeSantis has pushed them to as far as they're willing to go. They're trying to exile him to lame duck status 2 years early, and it's because they never wanted to do this stuff he made them do the last 5 years, and now they're pushing back, and eventually Trump's going to run into this, and so how far is he willing to go? Is Nicole Shanahan, really going to write checks in Democratic primaries? How prepared is Turning Point USA and Elon Musk? They don't have to go after all these Republicans, but they got to make 3, 4, 5 of them high-profile examples. They got to Fonzie them so that after the pilot episode, every time Fonzie says, you want to step into my office in the restroom, everybody backs off because they know what that means. They're going to get their butt kicked, okay? Are they willing to go that far? We will eventually reach the point where the flimsy, demonic, cowardly, feckless worldview of many of these Republicans will come into play, which is why we need to bank as many wins before we get to that tipping point moment as we can right now.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Steve Deace, my special guest this morning. You can follow him at Steve Deace Show on X. And we are seeing that happen. I think the analogy of the federal level to what's happening in the state of Florida right now, as my listeners are very well aware, it is that we need to have a succession plan to some of these leaders, because everything that Governor DeSantis has done that will ultimately be in 8 years of 2 consecutive terms could easily be undone if the legislature is opposed to him. And so on the federal level, we're going to see how strong really is Speaker Johnson, how strong really is Majority Leader Thune. And I'll just preview, by the way, the on-demand podcast, which is our AFR exclusive. I had a conversation yesterday with Jim Jordan exactly on this topic, which is where do we go legislatively to codify the executive orders that Trump is putting out at rapid pace? Because, Steve, you're absolutely right that the legislature has to step it up. And where do they go from here? And, it's a very frank and honest conversation. So that will drop Friday at afr.net. And you can click on the icon for On Demand and my conversation with Congressman Jim Jordan. But this goes back, Steve, I think, to taking advantage of the opportunity that we are given. And we are seeing that so many Christians, I think, are missing the moment with a lot of the infighting of, well, what team are you on? I mean, it reminds me, speaking of biblical examples of, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Paul, I'm of Trump, I'm of DeSantis. And I'm going, guys, we're all on the same team at this point. Everybody is set in their positions. DeSantis and Trump are working together. Every Republican should be working on the American mandate. We don't have time for those. Those were primary squabbles. And that was that point in time, which were necessary. They were good. But now we all should be in lockstep. And I don't see a lot of momentum from the overarching church side as much as I see the more overarching MAGA populist side. And that's a concern.
Yeah, let's just be honest. We are watching a Samson-like figure being asked to plunge the temple of Dagon, the fish demon, face down into the dirt, because the Levites didn't do their job for generations. So here we are, and that's where we are. And I think that you asked me about this. I think right after the election, what could what's the church's response to this? I think this is the time now that actually, churches like Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills in California with Jack Hibbs, for example. Mm-hmm. This is the time now that these kinds of churches, or churches that have that level of prophetic vision in their ministry and desire, in other words, the actual Great Commission, this is the time now for them to assert themselves. And essentially, I would start. I just step into that void and just start being leaders and assemble together. There's a group coming together with Seth Gruber and others called Clear Truth Media, and they call themselves, and their mission is post-denominationalism. All right, meaning that we're evangelicals. Where do we fundamentally align on the fundamentals? And we need to align on those things, or the entirety of the civilization that was inspired by those things, that through the church, the Word of God revealed them, is going to be lost to history forever. And I think it is a moment for that to happen. I think before we start asserting real cultural or political relevance, we have to reassert our place in the culture. I think the MAGA movement is kind of a stand-in for now, that has kind of been divinely or providentially, or maybe just by natural means, because nature abhors a vacuum. And so the idea that people are just, wide swaths of people are going to say, you bet, take my money, castrate my kids, and give my jobs to illegals. They were just going to say that forever without pushing back. That's just not, how human nature works either. So whatever it is, or some combination thereof, that is clearly the tip of the spear in the war, to the political vector of the war. What we really need first is the church to regain its foothold and integrity and respect and authority in the culture before it jumps to application stage. We are still in a place where most people in America, even that share a lot of our concerns and political positions, don't think of the church as the place to go as authoritative in their lives when they're faced with a great challenge. And I think it's also time that the church needs to, in this era, obviously the gospel is for all, but I think we need to also realize that we have largely left behind two groups of people, young men and righty America, undiscipled. And, and it's because for, much of the 2000s, people wanted to be the next Rick Warren, wanted to be the next Joel Osteen, wanted to be the next cover person, doing third way evangelism on Christianity Rarely to Never magazine, okay? And hoping that, and basically ripping and reading their sermons from the Gospel Coalition website. That has to end. And we've got to get back to being respected first on our own side before I think we have real political authority.
Well said. And Steve, I always appreciate your commentary, and you're absolutely right that the church needs to reassert its authority because they have the authority. It's positional authority. The church has the authority that is God-given, just like the institution of social government. It just has to claim it instead of all of this marketing nonsense. But we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
This is Walker Wildman with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Walker, praise the Lord. We've seen 13,000 answers to prayer. That's 13,000 Bibleless believers around the world who had no hope of a Bible but entered the AFR listening family. You've blessed 13,000. Our goal, 16,000. We have to do it by February 10th. Here's 3 praying for Bibles. Ahmed in the Middle East is a former Muslim. When he became a believer, he was beaten by radicals, but more than anything, he's praying for a Bible. Miriam is a widowed mother of 3. Her husband was murdered by the Boko Haram regime on the continent of Africa. She wants the Bible to raise those children to know and love Jesus. And Carlo is a former shaman in South America, now a follower of Christ, praying for a Bible. You've blessed 13,000 Bibleless believers, 3,000 to go by February 10th. It's $5 a Bible, $100 sends 20. And Walker, we're praying we can get it done.
Give generously at 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or visit sendbiblesnow.org, sendbiblesnow.org.
So you may ask, who are these people? These hundreds of thousands of people who've decided to do something different with how they pay for health care, and they join MediShare. It's a good question. MediShare members are people who realize they have a choice. They're not stuck with a status quo that they don't like. And we know this from research of MediShare members. They tend to have certain values in common, like their faith. They love that they're actually sharing with one another. They don't have to be part of a system that forces them to pay for things they don't support. They also value joining with other people who prioritize healthier lifestyles and encourage each other. They value customer service that's for them and their families, and they find that refreshing. And they're entrepreneurs, people who work in the gig economy, pastors, school teachers, business people who do clearly value saving money. That's a big part of this, up to $500 a month with MediShare. You too can do something different. You can start saving now. Here's the number. Call 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE. 833-44-BIBLE.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. A terrible tragedy in West Memphis, Arkansas. 3 young boys broke into a man's home late Sunday night. A 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and an 11-year-old. That's right, folks. One of the burglars, an 11-year-old. Children. The homeowner opened fire, killing the 14-year-old and wounding the 16-year-old. The dead child's grandmother, speaking with local media, says what her grandson did was wrong, but she rebuked the homeowner, wanted to know why her grandson was killed. Well, the homeowner did what any person would do in that situation. He had no idea if the burglars were armed. He had no idea what their intentions were. If you break into somebody's house, you get what's coming to you. Doesn't matter if you're 11 or 33. But why was an 11-year-old allowed to wander the streets after dark? Where were the parents? It seems to me they ought to face charges as well. Ultimately, they bear the full responsibility for the behavior of their kids. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, speaking of enduring wins versus the necessity for legislative priorities, one of the things that Trump consistently has been talking about is eliminating income tax. And I have been very clear for a long time that I think the 16th and 17th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution were 2 of the worst, especially in the point in time that they were ratified and all of the rise of the bureaucracy, especially in the early 1900s. And that really set the trajectory of America on a much bigger, more bureaucratic administrative state, because if the government as a non-revenue generating institution is allowed to tax so much and raise taxes from the people on the federal level and then spend however they prefer, this is how you're seeing all of this nonsense and waste from USAID. For example, I mean, some of these things like putting on a drag queen theater show in a different country for like thousands of dollars. Nobody in America. I mean, even the lefties are probably like, I didn't sign up for this. That's not anything that I would have encouraged my taxpayer dollars to go to. If the government had to actually have a GoFundMe campaign and said, hey, this is our priority, maybe a couple of really insane lefties would have donated to that kind of nonsense. But by and large, the average, normal, rational, common sense American taxpayer would have said absolutely no way. And so the elimination of income tax, I think, is a really difficult, steep promise, but even getting close would be a huge win for the Trump administration and even Americans overall. And I want to play and replay this clip from Dan Bongino's show. We played it yesterday, but I'd actually intended it for today, and then with the conversation yesterday, it just fit right in perfect. So isn't it amazing how sometimes that works? So for regular listeners, you'll remember this from yesterday, and then I want to get our next guest's reaction to it. But this is Dan Bongino on the effect on the economy of the elimination of income tax.
If Donald Trump can convince the Republican Congress to get rid of the income tax for a system of tariffs instead, ladies and gentlemen, the economy will absolutely explode like you have not seen since the Reagan years, maybe bigger. The explosion of capital and investment in the United States and the basically $30,000 or so raise a lot of people are going to get will absolutely blow our economy up like you've never seen before.
So let's welcome in Tho Bishop, who is the comms director for the Mises Institute. And Tho, I agree that when people get to keep more of their own money, then they actually have more to spend on various projects or even just vacations or other things that they may not spend money on when they don't have any and they're living paycheck to paycheck. And so, where realistically do you see this campaign promise and now administration promise of Donald Trump going to eliminate income tax?
Well, you're absolutely correct that the income tax is one of the great sins of the progressive era. Building off of the Bongino clip there, I mean, just the amount that is wasted not only from what the government takes from us, but the level of compliance cost and, how many lobbyists are in Washington purely for the sake of manipulating the tax code, which has made ever more complicated in kind of the current environment that we have right now. And this is an incredible vibe shift, just to have a president openly talking about this now multiple times over the past year. Now, the difficulty is going to be, tax revenue. The idea that we're going to be able to replace the amount of money that comes in through tariffs is difficult to imagine if the goal is similar revenue levels, right? And if you were to achieve the sort of tariff, if you were to put tariffs high enough to do that, then the other aspect of, I think, the tariff plan from President Trump, which is trying to bring in more investment away from overseas, right? Taking factories away from China, putting them in, Michigan or Alabama, right? Those are ways of avoiding the tariff dynamic there, which would decrease the revenue. And so this is why any sort of larger conversation about radical tax reform, if we're looking, it has to start with the tax burden that Americans have, and that just comes back down to the ever constant discussion about spending in the first place. Because if we were to eliminate the income tax, let's say have tariffs that met it 2/3 of the way, which itself would be a massive feat, and then just put the rest on debt, then you're still going to have the impact of inflation monetizing that debt, right? So there's going to be taxation thrown another way from that dynamic. We have a conversation whether inflation is better than income tax, and some of that dynamics as well. But that's where you've also had conversations about a sales tax, a fair tax, right? That would have a similar sort of consumption element to it. And so there's other discussions out there that are worth having, but simply the fact that you're having the President of the United States talking about the income tax being not some sort of great civic service is itself a remarkable shift from what we have come to expect from Washington in the conversations about this topic.
100%. And I think just having this conversation realistically instead of just sort of a policy theoretical argument is really fascinating and perhaps encouraging. So why practically, I mean, and maybe just the answer is because bureaucracy and, the uniparty doesn't want to do it, but why practically can't the federal level implement something like the state of Florida has done? Because we don't have a state income tax here, which is great. It saves me as a Florida resident, and I think you're in Florida too. It saves me a lot every year, and yet Governor DeSantis has been able to reduce the overall state debt in his now 6 years in office, and we have just a sales tax, and that has served a lot of really good purposes. And so when we're talking about things like a more consumption driven tax element, why can't we do that on the federal level and actually implement some of the types of policies that Florida has done really successfully on the federal level to reduce the deficit instead of actually contributing toward it?
Well, one is that Washington's governing structure just doesn't work fundamentally, and I think this is why I'm so excited about what Elon Musk is doing and things like that. But the entire appropriations process is controlled by a few chairs, right? This goes back to all the problems that we've had with not being able to pass proper budgets. I mean, just how much is loaded in there. Florida, you have in spite of some of the chaos going on with the immigration conversation the last couple of weeks in Tallahassee, Tallahassee actually functions to a certain extent. You also have a very powerful tool that DeSantis has, which is the veto pen, able to go in and veto line-by-line spending from the budget. That's something that's been in conservative circles at the federal level for quite some time. The reason why Washington doesn't do it is because there's so many invested interests within Washington that want that spigot to never tighten even shortly. This is why we're getting protests in front of USAID, right? Just at the thought of defunding, Sesame Street programs in Iraq or drag queen programs down in South America, right? It is the entire the city of D.C. exists to protect against cuts of spending. And so this is why I think the next 2 years, with what Doge is able to do, I mean, that is the most important battle in modern American history, because if we do not have that slight reversal, then anything else we want to talk about in terms of, meaningfully lowering interest rates to make it easier to afford a house, whether it's, having these conversations on the tax side of things, just getting that parasite of Washington off our back, it's going to require reversing course on the spending side of things. And if we can achieve, if Trump can achieve that certain feat, then I would caution against betting him for anything else he wants to accomplish.
Right. And, when we've seen Speaker Johnson bring things like Ukraine aid to the floor, passing, some of these larger omnibus spending bills and all of that, is that more pressure from the uniparty in Congress that now that Trump is in the White House, we may see some reversal on that? Or does that indicate maybe that, Congress overall really isn't interested in this?
Well, the problem is I think there's a lot of there's different factions within the Republican Party. I've got my own complaints about ways certain things have been handled, but unfortunately, Speaker Johnson just has a basic math problem where the priorities of certain people, like a Michael Lawyer from New York, right? His priority is removing some or getting back some of the SALT taxes deductions that are particularly unique for blue state residents, right? So that has so he's got certain interests like that. You've got Chip Roy that is or like a Thomas Massey that is that is just purely driven on reducing spending. You have certain constituency classes out there that want to prioritize spending coming into military bases in their district, right? You have all these different and I think every Republican can identify a certain set level of spending that they're okay to cut when it doesn't affect their district. But getting all of that into aligned interest is extremely difficult because some Republicans that are that prioritize physical discipline. Others, the physical discipline is a novelty, is the least, is kind of the lowest value that they would love to be able to brag about it, but they care a lot more about the bacon coming back. Or they care about, maybe they're particularly passionate about the protecting Ukraine. Maybe they're particularly passionate about, some other international dynamic there. And so getting all of those things aligned where you have a math equation that can lead to proactive spending rather than relying upon governance at deadline which often requires bring some Democrats on board. We've seen that with some of the battles over spending, even recently. It's very difficult to get a numbers game that can allow for very just thoughtful governance. Because once you have a must-pass bill, once you get to that desperation point, then everyone recognizes that desperation. Then everyone is there at the with their hand out trying to pad in every little pet project that they can and see what they can get away with. And that's the problem, is Washington is fundamentally broken with the way that it deals with spending. It is fundamentally broken with the way that it does most governing. And that's why Donald Trump, that active executive, we can talk about the expansion of executive power, but a big reason why executive power has expanded to such a great extent is because the incentives of the legislature are not to really govern, not to be adults. And so until you have a legislature that is full of that is stacked with people that genuinely care about prioritizing the financial well-being of the country, then we're going to be reliant upon, things like those that can use executive authority to go in and just try to clean out everything that is not explicitly earmarked, and shut off the valves in a very disruptive manner. So it's, to me, the spending dynamic is just a great demonstration of just how broken, fundamentally, systemically broken D.C. is, and unfortunately that requires more than simply having Republicans in charge. And so we'll see how the appropriations process goes this time around. It's such the thin, narrow that we a majority that we have in the House. Is the reconciliation bills and all that process. They try to have the one or two big, beautiful bills. How serious are Republican House members going to be?
Right. Well, Tho Bishop, really appreciate it. And all of that and how broken Washington is why I've been a huge advocate for a long time of the Convention of States project, because I think that if we take the power out of Washington and on the state level have delegates to the convention, they don't even have to be legislators. The petition has to pass through state legislatures first to actually call a convention for purposes of proposing amendments. But we could repeal the 16th Amendment. We could repeal the 17th Amendment. The 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment that went through a congressional proposal. This type of thing is never going to go through a congressional proposal, but it can go through the states because of we the people. And I wish that Trump would very specifically be an advocate for Convention of States, if just for this purpose of tax reform. That's the way we do it. But we'll be right back with more.
Weekday mornings at 8 Central, Pastor Jeff Shreve offers real truth for today.
I'm the pastor of First Baptist Church in Texarkana, Texas, and the founder of From His Heart Ministries.
The world around us is rapidly changing, but God and His truth will never change.
I may be the host of the show, but I want God's Word and His truth to be the star of the show.
Join Pastor Jeff Shreve each weekday morning at 8 Central for Real Truth for Today on American Family Radio. The Awakening with Bishop E.W. Jackson.
We have not been made the greatest nation in the history of mankind by denigrating God. We have become the greatest nation on earth because we are a nation that acknowledged Almighty God to be the source of our values, our rights, our liberties, and that therefore we are accountable to Him.
The Awakening on the podcast page at afr.net.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. The city lies 4 square, its length, width, and height all equal, 1,380 miles for each dimension. The city's wall is 216 feet high, 12 gates around the city, with each gate made of a single pearl. Streets of gold so pure they're translucent. No need for a sun. God's glory lights the city. No tears, no pain. I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
I think we need to change our perspective on giving from a have to to a get to. You know, we're money managers for the King of Kings. Everything belongs to God. And when we give, we're able to connect to the heart of God, to be involved in His grand story from everlasting to everlasting. And when we give, I think it does a few things for us. Number one, it changes our perspective. It frees us from our own little mini kingdoms and focuses and lifts our sights to the kingdom of God and allows us to participate in His redemptive purposes. Now, if the way we handle God's money tells a story about what's most important to us, the question we have to ask ourselves is, what story is it telling? Does it align with truly what's most important to me? And if not, maybe some changes need to be made.
Please give us a call, 1-800-326-4543, extension 345, or you can visit us at afafoundation.net. We look forward to hearing from you soon.
Hey, 8 Days of Hope family. You know, these last few years have been the busiest ever for the ministry. In fact, in 2024, we deployed a record 23 times to love and serve those in need. And we couldn't do all that God has asked for us to do without your continued prayers and support. So today we're excited to share that we've partnered with Free Will to provide you with an opportunity to leave a legacy of hope for generations to come, all while securing a stable future for your loved ones. We hope to take advantage of this amazing partnership and the ability to create your legal will. It's 100% free to you, and most people finish in 20 minutes or less. Free Will also offers the opportunity to help you make a smart gift to support the efforts of 8 Days of Hope. That's a donation of stocks, QCDs, DAFs, or crypto. So to learn more about how to utilize this resource or to make a smart gift today, please visit 8daysofhope.com. And remember, your support leaves a kingdom impact for the brokenhearted.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. And this is coming from The Hill this morning. President Trump on Tuesday suggested Palestinians should be permanently relocated out of the Gaza Strip and that the United States should take over the territory after it was reduced to rubble by more than 15 months of war between Israel and Hamas. Trump, who was alongside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a White House visit, doubled down on his suggestion that neighboring Jordan and Egypt take in those from Gaza. But Tuesday was the first time Trump was more clear about Palestinians not returning to their homes in the coastal enclave. This has been a really interesting proposal. I've seen, kind of some wide different reactions and commentary. The memes are just fantastic on this one. But one of the things that I love about just some of these perhaps wild, we could characterize it, proposals, is that Trump isn't afraid to just throw out a lot of these things and keep the media just going, I don't even know what's going on. What types of questions should we even ask while he is getting so many things done? And so Trump has hosted Benjamin Netanyahu in the White House, and he's extended his stay. I believe it's until Saturday, according to reports. And the Times of Israel said as well this morning, addressing around 200 reporters after an hour-long meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump in the White House, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he is, quote unquote, honored to be the first foreign leader invited to the White House. Quote, "You are the greatest friend Israel has ever had in the White House," says Netanyahu, listing Trump's policies toward Israel in his first term, including leaving the Iran nuclear deal, brokering the Abraham Accords, and moving the embassy to Jerusalem. I have to just say from a personal standpoint, so I went to Israel. The only time I've ever been able to visit the Holy Land was prior to the first Trump term, and being there in the Holy Land for Christians, if you've never had that opportunity, I know that there's a lot of strife and probably a lot of reasons people aren't necessarily visiting the Middle East right now. But if you ever get the opportunity and feel safe and comfortable doing so, it is such an amazing, incredible experience. My tour guide, who was a Messianic Jew, so of course, Jewish by birth, but Christian in belief in the Messiah, in the person of Jesus Christ, was just a remarkable individual and knew so much about the Bible and was talking about the different landmarks and the different sites that we visited. And one of the things I will never forget that he said as the bus was headed up into Jerusalem, and said, this is why the Bible describes it that way, because literally from all sides you go up into Jerusalem. And he said, you have read the Bible in black and white, but after this visit, you will read in color. And I loved that because it's absolutely true. When I read about the Garden of Gethsemane, when I read about where Jesus walked, I read in color because now I can see where I walked in the footsteps of where Jesus walked in the brilliance of my mind's eye and the memories that I had in that location. I was privileged to share that trip with my cousin. She and I went along with another tour group, and it was amazing. But during that time as well, one of the other things that stood out to me that our tour guide mentioned is that there was a site in Jerusalem that was specifically designated for where the embassy would sit if it was ever moved to Jerusalem, which the Jews and the Christians all wanted. And there was nothing there when I was there, except for, on that little plot of land, a tiny American flag. And it was such a reminder to me, and every time I think about that, of how much the United States and our support genuinely means to Israel. And how much America really does need to prioritize and understand that it is in our nation's interest to support Israel, to champion Israel, and to understand that the promise in Genesis and the covenant between God and Abraham saying, I give you this land, is enduring for as long as this earth remains, until the book of Revelation, for those of us who are dispensationalists and read the book of Revelation as literal prophecy. And we know that Christ is returning in the second coming, and then there will be a new heaven and new earth. Until that day, and we still have our physical current earth, that land belongs to Israel, because it doesn't matter who else lays claim or what the wars and the fights are. God's promise and his covenant remains. And so from a purely policy standpoint, the United States, in recognizing Israel's right to the land, is recognizing God. And one of the most, I think, fundamentally significant things that Donald Trump did in his first term was to move the U.S. Embassy to Israel. And that is a huge sign of America's consistent championing of the nation of Israel. And so every time that we talk about, anything in the context of Israel, I'm always reminded of my trip to Israel and seeing a lot of those things, and so many people just coming up to me because I look very American, frankly. And then of course when people hear me speak, it's the American accent, and so they would come up to me and just say, thank you so much for supporting Israel. And we love America. And there was just such a deep, enduring and abiding love there in Israel. And I just love it. And I love when we can get our good friend, Joel Rosenberg. We'll have him on soon again to talk about everything that is going on in Israel. But in the last 2 minutes we have in this program as well, I want to highlight one other news story. This is coming from The Blaze. And it says, exclusive evidence in a new case suggests Obama administration colluded with big tech to steal invention that led to Chinese dominance. This is an incredibly explosive story. I would highly encourage all of you to read this on The Blaze, because of course the left-wing media is not talking about this. This is why other news outlets like American Family News, like The Blaze and others are so incredibly important, because a unanimous jury verdict was reversed by an Obama judge shortly after the Democrat administration apparently took interest in the case. So Jeff Parker is the CEO of the small Florida-based technology company Parker Vision, and he explained to Blaze Media co-founder Glenn Beck on Thursday how the tech giant Qualcomm allegedly stole one of the most revolutionary patented innovations in American history with help of elements of the Obama administration, technology that was ultimately offshored to China, possibly giving America's preeminent adversary a competitive edge. So Glenn Beck said, we're at the beginning of seeing corruption exposed like never before in America. And so you can go and, this is a pretty lengthy article, and it describes all of these samplings. But this is just a consistent reminder of why things like Doge are so important, and why Democrats like Chuck Schumer are absolutely terrified that DOJ is requiring accountability. And whether it's under the banner of DOJ or it's just another agency within the Trump administration or wherever it comes from, this should have come from Congress a long time ago. I mean, this isn't the first time that we've had the Republican trifecta. But as we've been discussing throughout this program, and I think throughout especially the last couple of weeks, the uniparty in D.C., even among some Republicans, is so corrupt that they don't want to shine the light of truth on to what's going on and how much of our own previous administrations and elected officials have genuinely not supported America's interests over their own. And this is why we need accountability and we need audits. Just like in election integrity, when people are calling for audits and somehow, that's going to disenfranchise. Well, no, an audit is a common everyday practice that banks use to reconcile their accounting, that anyone who is concerned about reconciling the math and making sure that everything is legitimate, it's on track, and it is transparent will ultimately have in their process and procedures. Audits are a very standard thing. Accounting and accountability is a very standard thing. And Washington, for far too long, has gotten away with this. And so many of these stories are going to consistently come out, I think, as we learn more about the reckless spending of U.S. aid, as we're now learning about the Obama administration, what we're going to learn, I think, about the Biden administration, that a lot of people, myself included, I think rightly characterized as the third term of Obama. I mean, these are so many people who genuinely did not have America and Americans' priorities and American citizens' best interests. I mean, if you just look at the pushback against Trump's immigration plan, for anyone on the Democrat side, or even these ridiculous, nonsensical legislators in Florida now that for their own purposes are just trying to marginalize Trump and DeSantis's immigration plan for Florida, they don't have the best interests of the people at heart. They have some other interest ahead in their priority. That's what the people should object to. And when we are considering future primaries, when we're considering future elections, all of that needs to be taken into account, because individuals who use their public office for other purposes, special interests, their own benefit, their own gain, what now this piece from The Blaze is suggesting about the Obama administration colluding with big tech, what big tech has done. We remember the Twitter files. Now Mark Zuckerberg is, the mea culpa, and he's trying to be Trump's best friend. I don't really buy the longevity of that. I think he'd be totally in lockstep with censorship if Kamala Harris had ended up getting into the White House. He's not doing this because, he suddenly had a revelation of morality. All of these things, whether it's in elected office or it's bad actors in the private sector, we need to look at what is happening, what has happened, and get accountability so that we can be the most informed constituency in America, so that we can understand who it is we're voting for and not just go off of advertisements or endorsements. For example, Trump has made some not great endorsements. Even in upcoming elections in the state of Florida, there are some people that he's endorsed that I'm thinking, I don't know if he really knows exactly what these people have stood for in the past and what their record is. And we have to go based on more than just the media advertising, because it's salesmanship. It's nothing different than a product that's being advertised on TV so that you will go out and buy it and consume it and spend your hard-earned dollars on their company. It works the exact same in politics. It is absolutely nothing different for endorsements. So we have to demand accountability. And for the ridiculous march in D.C. yesterday where Elizabeth Warren and, other people are saying, well, this is the march against Elon, that he wasn't an elected official. Well, my response to that was, absolutely, Elon was on the ballot, not for his own elected office, but as part of the administration. I voted for a whole administration, not just Trump at the top. I want all of this to continue happening exactly how it is. That's what I voted for. That's what the mandate is for. And that's what the uniparty in DC and other states absolutely needs to recognize. So Read this piece in the Blaze, and as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.